these conversations, they necessarily involve a lot of language about LGBTQ people. So I'm really grateful that Pastor Bob has that perspective of inviting me to share my story and inviting us to be relational around this. It's a blessing. So anyway, about 5 years ago, I began discerning a call to ministry. Specifically, I was perceiving God calling me to leave my career as a music professor and to attend seminary and then to become a pastor in the United Methodist Church. And as one might expect, I had a few questions before I could sort of pursue that to work through. Some of the questions were like, why would God be calling me to this? And am I really equipped to lead congregations in that way? Can I preach? Will I be able to pay off my student loans? Those kind of questions. And as it turns out, a lot of clergy end up having those kinds of questions as they're pursuing possible ministry. But for me, there was another set of questions that, from my understanding, a majority of prospective clergy don't have to ask. Namely, why would I attempt to serve in a denomination whose doors are not yet open to me because of my orientation and marital status? As a person married to a partner of the same sex, it would have made a lot more sense to become a pastor in a denomination that was open, one of those denominations that Pastor Bob named earlier. So I really prayed a lot about that and wrestled with God and wondered. And each time that I kind of felt God leading me around that, it was always, these Methodist people are your people. So, well, God's not surprised by my orientation. And this God who was calling me was also is aware of what's happening in our denomination. So I had to finally kind of let go and say, well, I have to trust God on this and just move forward. So then at that point, the key question became for me, how do I move forward in a candidacy process like this, being who I am, with the most integrity that I could? And throughout the process, a number of United Methodists, who I believe were all trying to be supportive, encouraged me in different ways. And a lot of those ways were pretty difficult to hear. There was a lot of encouragement to be silent or dishonest until I could make it through the process. And then there were other times where people said, well, if you just were to get divorced, then you could serve. Stuff like that. So those conversations were challenging, although I do believe they were coming from a place of sort of hope for me in my ministry. It was difficult. And ultimately, I just felt that the only way to honor God's call and to honor my marriage and truly to honor the people I would end up serving in future congregations would be to move through this as authentically and honestly as I could about who I am. And so that's what I did. I really tried to bring the fullness of myself to each step of the process. And that wasn't easy. And I was kind of told that I wouldn't get very far as a candidate for ministry in the United Methodist Church. So then the nuts and bolts of what ended up happening were that every time I met with my DS or went before my district committee on ministry or ultimately before the board of ordained ministry, with all of that stuff clearly on the table, people kept affirming my call and saying yes. I was surprised each time, but it was truly felt like the Holy Spirit would show up and that hearts were kind of changed around that. Just in that moment, I could often feel that. And then in fact, I was, because LGBTQ people end up inadvertently being pioneers in things, not wanting to necessarily, but I was the first person in West Michigan who went through the Board of Ordained Ministry interviews openly married to a partner of the same sex. And they voted to recommend me for commissioning and provisional membership. My understanding is that vote was fairly unanimous. So once that happened, that was really beautiful, and that's to be celebrated. It's a sign of hope, from my perspective. And once that happened, though, things got kind of real on the cabinet level, because namely the bishop was kind of had to make a decision of whether he would break the discipline and follow the board's recommendation and commission and appoint me at this time, or if it was better to wait until stuff happened in February, with that being so close to a vote. Is now the time to break rules or not? Was kind of the conversation we had. And I want to say that we had really great conversations together. A lot of times the cabinet around LGBTQ matters are painted as sort of, they have to follow the discipline and not very kind, but our bishop is very kind and graceful, and he's very supportive of me and my ministry. But ultimately we sent a letter together to the board of ordained ministry telling them that we're putting my process on hold until after February. So that was the decision there. So that puts me now in a kind of a strange liminal space until then. I'm technically approved by the board for commissioning and provisional membership, but not yet officially commissioned or appointed. So I don't know what I am. My seminary colleagues who similarly passed through the board, went through all the steps I went through, graduated, all of that, are now commissioned and appointed as pastors. And they post a lot about that on Facebook. But I'm not. And really the only reason is because I'm married to a partner of the same sex. And that's really hard. But on the other hand, there were key leadership in the Methodist Church who came together to find a place for me to serve during this time. That's here. And that's been really beautiful. So there's both hard and beautiful in my story. And right now, it's okay to live in that tension for me. I feel that I'm really called to be a prophetic voice within the denomination at this time. There's other LGBTQ folk that for whatever reason can't be, and that's okay too. And so I want to just close by saying this, that I think what we're doing here together in ministry at First Church is a prophetic sign of how I believe God desires and is calling the church to be. You've welcomed me and my wife, and it's not been sort of a big deal, and it's been okay, and you've made space for us, and you've allowed us to serve with you in authentic relationship. And we're getting to know God better, we're doing ministry together, and just as every other part of me, it's not like this one sort of separate thing. It feels integrated. And so I'm grateful for that. And I believe that this story points to the fact that God is up to something. And in the midst of difficult stuff, I think there are good and hopeful things happening in the church. And I'm happy to sit down and have a conversation with you anytime you want. So just reach out.